Okay, so moving forward, we are going to be talking now about the problem analysis essay, which is your second major written assignment. So I've done a really quick presentation here just to give you an idea of what you're going to be doing in this paper and to lay out specifically what I'm looking for and how you should be laying this paper out and how you should outline and organize and of course talk a little bit about the different things that you should be considering when you're doing this problem analysis paper. I know this is a little different than our first assignment. We're starting to move into more analytical work. So this is going to be a transition, so I want to give you guys as much assistance as I can. So problem analysis. Clearly, and this is going to seem very basic and very elementary, but I do want to point it out that Aristotle's advice, if you're not familiar, is that every argument needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And again, seems very elementary, and I agree, but it is something that I do want to point out because when you're thinking about how you're going to compose your argument to identify this problem, then you need to be thinking of the beginning and the middle and the end and what these different pieces need to contain. So for your beginning, you do need to have a logical beginning, and what I mean by that is that it needs to contain this big picture idea. It needs to introduce the problem. It's it's your starting point. It gives the audience the details about what's to come, and you don't need to give me a lot of description in this introduction paragraph because that description is going to come in the paragraphs that follow. So it's going to come in the body of your paper. But for the beginning, you're going to want to just introduce what it is that you're going to be dealing with, what you're going to identify as the problem, and open the door for further analysis in the body of your paper. So avoid fluff, and of course avoid flowery language. We talked a little bit about succinct language before. Stay to the point. Don't fill your papers with fluff, with extraneous language. Okay. Another way that you could also tie the introduction together is to introduce an anecdote or an example. To give you an example of that, I wrote a paper recently about gender and sexuality with children's toys, which seems kind of bizarre, but I started this paper. I was sitting in the hospital with my daughter. Actually, I was in labor, and we were watching Good Morning America, and it was the big news story at the time was that Sports Illustrated had put out their annual swimsuit edition, and Barbie was on the cover. And it was this big to do because the parents were furious because it was this sexualized image of a child's toy. And I started thinking about Barbie and about how I played with Barbie and how my daughter would inevitably play with Barbie one day, and how large Barbie's presence is in childhood, and what media is doing with Barbie. And the more I thought about my relation to Barbie and my daughter's relation to Barbie, then the more I wanted to do some more research, and that's kind of where this paper that I was writing was born. So when I wrote the paper, the introduction paragraph really it began with this anecdote from an experience from my own life, and that's kind of how I kickstarted everything. That's how I introduced the issue that I was going to talk about, and how I introduced this research that I'd been doing. So if you have a personal experience or you have a personal connection with a problem that you're identifying, then the introduction is a good place to include that. A lot of times that anecdote will engage your audience, will draw them into what you're talking about because it seems like you have something really important to say because you've been directly impacted by whatever problem you're referring to here. So it's just an idea. Also, you're going to want to establish your common ground, so you're going to want to explain that this is not a problem that just affects me. This is a problem that affects a lot of other people, and you're going to want to make that clear, okay? And then, of course, the introduction should then transition to your specific topic. It should transition to your specific problem analysis. It should just give us a really broad overview and then kickstart us into the next part, which is the body, which is the details and the description. And then, of course, your thesis statement is going to act as one of those transition pieces because a thesis statement is going to come near the end, if not the last line in the introduction paragraph, and it's going to pull us exactly from this intro idea all the way into the specific details of what you're going to be talking about. So your thesis statement, we'll talk a little bit more about it pretty soon, but the thesis statement it's a debatable statement. So it really defines the boundaries with which you must work. So the thesis statement is the point that you're making. It's your claim. It's what this whole paper is going to be about. So it needs to obviously contain the problem itself, why it's a problem, or how it's a problem, or both. So just make sure that it transitions from the intro to the body, but it clearly identifies the problem itself and explains what you're going to be doing in the rest of the paper. So your body paragraphs, in your body paragraphs, you're going to want to include these things. You're going to want to think about the opposition's view of the problem. So if another group doesn't see it as a problem, you're going to want to take that and understand that that's important, that the opposition's view is important, because if you don't acknowledge it, then you run the risk of losing half of your audience, because half your audience may fall in line with the opposition, and you want to connect with them on their level too. You want to make sure that you point out that this is your problem that you've identified, and while the opposition feels this way, you need to acknowledge it and don't refute it. Obviously, the refuting comes in the solution proposal, but you want to come across with a level playing field, okay? So identify the opposition, acknowledge what they believe is the case or the truth with this problem. So maybe they don't see it as a problem, you'll say that. Maybe they do see it as a problem, but from a different angle, or they're looking at it in a way that you're not, and that you think that your perspective could be beneficial. So then, of course, they'll talk about your view of the problem, and this is where you're going to use research. You're going to use your resources. You've got to use at least 2 for this paper, and you're going to use those source materials to back up your evidence that this is actually a significant problem. And then from there, you're going to talk a little bit about why the opposition is missing this big picture, why they're not seeing what you're seeing, why your perspective is something new and fresh, and that they could benefit from taking a look at this problem from your angle. Okay? And then what is happening today with this issue? Again, you're not solving the problem yet. You're not proposing a solution. That's going to come in your 3rd major written assignment. But for the sake of this paper, you're going to leave us kind of with where we are today. What is the current state of this problem? Has it been addressed? Has there been some kind of solution already? What's currently going on? And of course, make sure that we understand that whatever solution's out there, if any, it's not sufficient. There are still things that need to be done to solve this problem. Your conclusion is going to reinforce your thesis statement. Your paper should come full circle in this conclusion. Of course, big picture is this is a problem. I need everyone reading this paper, or I need my audience to understand that this is a problem. So make sure your thesis does that. Conclusions can draw from the information that you've pulled from your source material. Of course, you can summarize that basic material, but it should not just be a summary. Your conclusion should never just be a simple summary. It needs to pull those conclusions in, but of course to reinforce your idea, reinforce your thesis statement. You could also include another anecdote if you wanted to, but maintain the common ground throughout. So be careful when you're using the anecdote, because it's great to include your personal experience, and it is an engaging tool, like we mentioned before. But if you maintain that common ground, if you make it seem like this is not just a problem for me, this is a problem for me and potentially for you and for other members in our society. So make sure that you're laying that groundwork in this conclusion, but also all through the paper. Just a couple reminders about parenthetical documentation after quotes or paraphrasing. I think there is a miscommunication going on, or a misconception, I suppose I should say, about paraphrasing. If you're paraphrasing a source, you still should cite it in the text with parenthetical documentation. So just because you're not quoting it directly doesn't mean that you don't need to cite what source material you're pulling from. So whether you're quoting or paraphrasing, make sure that you're putting the citation in there, and the in-text citation is the author's last name, no punctuation whatsoever, and the page number. Okay? If you get it from the web, then you're going to omit page numbers. It's a little more challenging if you're online to understand page numbers. So just omit them all together. If you pull the source from the web, if Jazz was the author, then in parentheses you can just put Jazz. No need to put the date that it was published or the page number, obviously, just the last name. Punctuation comes after the quote. So if your quotation is except for quotes, make sure you're in the quote with the quotation marks, put your parenthetical documentation, and then the punctuation, the period, comes after. And when possible, do not end a paragraph with documentation. Don't end a paragraph with either quotes or paraphrasing any other source material, because what I really want is for you to end each of your paragraphs with your thoughts. I want to hear from you. So if you're getting close to the end and you use another source to make a point, then use the next line or two to explain what this means to the audience and what this quote means for your problem, your interpretation of the quote. Just give me something from you. I want to see what you're thinking about the materials that you're using and how you're analyzing what you're pulling from your source material. So things to remember, be mindful of spelling and grammar, because I'm going to be looking for those things. Be mindful of that when you're in the peer review process, but also when you're doing the revising. If in doubt, cite it. If you're not 100% sure whether or not you should cite it, just go ahead and cite it. Plagiarism is a big deal. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if you pull anything whatsoever from another source or a scholarly piece of information, make sure that you're citing it no matter what. And again, if in doubt, cite it. So you're going to be entering the larger conversation. That's one of the big things to remember, is that your idea may not be super original. It may not be a brand new problem that you and only you have ever come up with. But you're going to enter the larger conversation. You're going to propose a solution, or an original solution, I should say. So be prepared to enter the conversation. And I think that should alleviate some of the pressure, because you shouldn't be, I'm not expecting you to create, to solve some huge problem that no one's ever even thought about before. But I am asking you to take a look about what's going on out in society and join a conversation about a specific problem. And then, of course, your paragraphs, each paragraph is going to serve either one of two purposes. You're going to explain some ideas, you're going to identify thoughts and ideas, and then you're going to break those up and explain them further. Or you're going to break up text. You're going to break up some of the source material that you've been working with. You're going to use a quote from it, and then use that paragraph to really wrestle with what that source is saying and what can be gained from this process. Okay, so that's really it. Again, the problem analysis paper, I think I've listed this in the plan, but your problem analysis paper is posted in Blackboard along with your peer groups. I think that's actually posted in the next week. But be thinking about this problem analysis, and I think the next due date is not the end of this week, but the next. So just be thinking about this moving forward, and be ready to ask me any questions if they arise. And I think that's really about it.